We come now to the adjournment. The whip to move.
Thanks, this House to now adjourn.
Thank you. The question is that this House do now adjourn. Perhaps I can appeal for the cooperation of colleagues. They should follow the example of the Right Honourable Gentleman Member for Rutland and Melton, who is leaving the chamber in a most decorous manner, as is his wont. If colleagues are unaccountably declining to stay to listen to the Honourable Member for Colne Valley, perhaps they can do so quickly and quietly so we can hear the thrust of his case on stone theft. The question is that this House do now adjourn. Mr. Jason McCartney.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I am delighted to have been granted this adjournment debate on the issue of stone theft, which is plaguing my local communities in the Colne and Home Valleys and Linley. Now, Mr. Speaker, there have been some very light-hearted comments about the unexplained disappearance of a certain slab of stone with writing on it towards the end of the general election campaign. However, for my constituents, the issue of stone theft is extremely serious. Our heritage is systematically being dismantled. The instances of stone theft in my beautiful part of West Yorkshire are at epidemic proportions. I've been receiving weekly reports from my local West Yorkshire Police of multiple stone thefts for the past 2 years, and many constituents have been telling me of their first-hand experiences of this ever-increasing crime. Homes, schools, farms and places of worship have been victims of thieves snatching building materials. Roof tiles, topping stones on dry stone walls, York stone path slabs and many more are systematically being stolen. Some are clearly being sold on, others are being used by rogue builders so that they don't have the expense of sourcing their own materials. Scapegoat Hill Junior and Infant School was twice targeted by stone thieves in less than a fortnight. Slates were stolen from the school roof overnight. They were replaced at great expense, and then just a couple of days after the scaffolding had come down, the roof tiles were stolen again from that school. Places of worship have been repeatedly targeted. A Freedom of Information request by my local newspaper, the Huddersfield Examiner, to West Yorkshire Police has revealed that building materials were by far the most commonly stolen items from religious buildings in my area since 2012. Shockingly, the figures show that thieves had targeted places of worship in Kirklees 132 times in the last 3 years. And earlier this year, Mr. Speaker, 200-year-old Yorkshire stone paving slabs were ripped up from Christchurch in Linthwaite, with their replacement costing in excess of £2,000. Nowhere has been safe from this crime.
Will my honourable friend give way?
I'll give way to my honourable friend.
I'm extremely grateful. Does he agree with me that this is actually far more popular than people would really even appreciate? That even in my own village of Pendleton last year, Mr. Tony Ormiston, one of my villagers, had 8 slabs removed from his backyard. And it does appear to me that it's actually not taken as seriously as it should be.
No, absolutely. My honourable friend is absolutely right, and that's why I wanted to highlight this issue. This is of epidemic proportions in my constituency, where we've got so much wonderful stone, whether it's on pathways, on stone walls, or on buildings and places of worship, and that's why I've wanted to bring it to the House this evening. A constituent from South Crossland, Mr. Speaker, has told me about how distressing it is when just 2 weeks ago vehicles pulled up in the middle of the night at their farm and thieves took away the topping stones of their boundary walls. These walls have marked the boundary of their farm for hundreds of years, and the toppings on the walls are very old black-faced local sandstone and very, very hard to replace. Another constituent from Colne Valley tells me the theft of stone slates is totally out of hand in that valley and has asked for the sale of stone to be registered in the same way as scrap metal. And I shall come on to that in a few moments' time. Meanwhile, just up the road in Leeds, Mr. Speaker, in the past year, Leeds City Council has replaced £50,000 worth of York stone stolen from pavements across the city. That's an increase of more than 50% on the previous 12 months. And this comes at a time when local council budgets are very, very tight. This is costing tens of thousands of pounds. And as I've said, these are far from victimless crimes. Now, I am proud that the previous coalition government acted very quickly indeed to tackle metal theft. The 2013 Scrap Metal Dealers Act, which requires dealers to hold a licence to trade and gave councils powers to deal with rogue businesses, slashed the number of metal thefts. The targeted operations against unscrupulous scrap metal dealers, in conjunction with police and local agencies, resulted in more than 1,000 arrests for theft and related offences, and police seized more than 600 vehicles involved in that kind of criminality. And statistics show that there was a 40% fall in the number of offences for the first 3 months of that Act to the end of March 2013, compared to the 3 months to the end of June 2012. So the action taken then was incredibly successful against metal thefts, and that's the sort of action we're looking to try and curb this crime of stone theft. Now, I'd like to actually praise West Yorkshire Police for their action so far in tackling this epidemic of stone thefts in my part of West Yorkshire. They've launched a campaign using smart water. Kirklees Safer Communities acquired funding to protect walls in the area with smart water. And for those who don't know, it's a uniquely coded forensic liquid which shows up under a UV lamp. It means that stone merchants or police can easily identify whether stone is stolen, and if so, it can be traced back to its original location. Letters went to hundreds of homes, warning residents of dangers of stone theft and advising ways to protect their home and their property. And a similar project which operated in my area recently led to a temporary reduction in the incidence of stone theft. Now, many of these thefts actually take place in broad daylight, with thieves posing as workmen, sometimes even brazen enough to actually wear the day-glow jackets. So vigilance is definitely required. And this last week, West Yorkshire Police have had a publicity campaign with the world-famous landscape Yorkshire artist Ashley Jackson, highlighting that the theft of stone from our beautiful stone walls causes great damage to our countryside and our heritage. I've got the leaflet here, and it just says that Yorkshire stone, once it's gone. Our landscape is not replaceable, so let's stop the thieves from taking it. Stone theft and the removal of old stone tiles from roofs might look innocent activity. Examples of where this could be happening include a rural location, outside a church, from someone's garden, or in the middle of a town or village. You have no way of knowing if it is a job of work or a theft. And the police advise, see it, note it, let's hang on to our Yorkshire. Mr. Speaker, that is the scale of the problem. Now, I appreciate this is not as straightforward as tackling metal theft, as the materials aren't always sold on immediately for cash. But I'd like to just wind up by having three specific policy requests, please. Firstly, a dedicated stone theft task force, like the one set up to tackle metal thefts in 2011. Secondly, a national and regional awareness campaign so that householders and businesses dealing with stone, tiles and paving slabs check where they are from, and so that the public can challenge those posing as workmen in those day-glow jackets when they are ripping up stone pavements or taking off roof tiles. And finally, I'd like to see an increase in the fines being handed out to those convicted, and also the introduction of some exemplary punishments to deter these extremely anti-social criminals. So, Mr. Speaker, I'll finish here by saying our heritage is being stolen brick by brick. Let's tackle this scourge of stone theft as we did with metal theft. Thank you.
Well, the Minister of State, Mr. Mike Penning.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Speaker, and it's a pleasure to have my first adjournment debate of this Parliament on a subject which I say to my honourable friend did cause some smirks when I mentioned to colleagues that I was going to respond on this debate tonight, but I think those people who were smirking were wrong if they knew actually what's happening in their constituencies and what's happening in the Colne Valley. And can I congratulate my honourable friend for securing this debate. In his comments to the House this evening, Mr. Speaker, he's obviously particularly concentrated in the areas of heritage and value stone. But stone in general, Mr. Speaker, has become a very, very expensive commodity. And it's being used in such a myriad of different ways in our communities. And very often people don't even know whether it's old or not. It's made to look very old, and it does mature very, very quickly. And if I can, Mr. Speaker, this is allude to some comments as to this is not a new event. This is something that's been going on for many, many years. Mr. Speaker, once I was a young man, and during my youth as a fireman in Essex, on my off days I would go and fish on a place called Canvey Island, and many of us in this House will know that Canvey Island was badly flooded back in 1952. And I used to beach cast off of the point on Canvey Island, but in the early hours, just often when it would get light, you would suddenly see some characters creeping around sometimes, and I was sure they weren't fishermen, because we tend to know the community quite well. And what was happening, Mr. Speaker, is people were stealing stones from the breakwater, the walls that were protecting an area that is actually very much prone to flood. That was some 30 years ago, Mr. Speaker. And I must admit, it was very difficult. Mobile phones weren't available then, and it was very difficult to report it. But when you had the conversations with the police, which we often did as firemen, and I mentioned this to them, it was known to them, but very, very difficult to actually handle. So bringing this to the House tonight, I think is very opportune, because as my honourable friend has already alluded to, the government acted very quickly on scrap metal and iron, and we saw some very, very historic pieces of wrought iron vanish from our streets and from our communities just to be melted down for scrap, which was appalling. And in my own constituency, we had people injured that actually fell down the areas in industrial areas where the grates had been removed, and when they went to work in the morning, particularly during the winter, where they walked the normal areas where they would walk, and they went straight down the drains. Very, very dangerous indeed. But as this is such an important issue, Mr. Speaker, you would be quite right to assume that West Yorkshire and other constabularies are doing their best to make sure that we are doing it. And I will rule nothing out this evening, as the Honourable Gentleman, my friend, has asked for. 3 areas, 2 of those areas we're already doing, and I'll touch on those in a moment. But it is much more difficult than actually the sanctions and the licence than we did with metal, and I'm sure he understands that. Actually, my own Chief Constable, Andy Bliss from the Hertfordshire Constabulary, heads up heritage theft in the United Kingdom on behalf of the Chief Constables, and I have actually raised this with him, and he knows about it, because not only because the milestones were stolen in my own constituency, we have the great privilege, and Mr. Speaker, you know my constituency well, we have the great privilege of having the Watling Road, the Roman road going through my constituency, and the milestones were stolen. And interestingly enough, we got them back. But we got them back with the public actually being the eyes and ears. And I will touch, if I can, on Neighbourhood Watch, Mr. Speaker. But this is a form of Neighbourhood Watch. We think often about Neighbourhood Watch being in our towns and in our cities. Actually, in our rural communities, it's vitally important as well. And the thefts we've had over the recent years, particularly from farms, is actually something where the Neighbourhood Watch has actually come together quite well. And smart water has really helped in the prevention of very expensive farm machinery being sold, often to order. And I'm pleased to see that West Yorkshire are using smart water, which needs an infrared light, Mr. Speaker, to indicate that it's actually been marked already. And it's not just about stone, and it's not just about heritage, it's about slate, and it's about basically where that people feel they can make a profit, they will steal. And that's where we need to come in to make sure we have the legislation on the statute to do so. And across the country, police forces are actually aware of what the problems are, and we are treating it seriously. So I can't think of a better place for a policeman to stand at the dispatch box and say to the 43 authorities that are under my control that they need to take this enormously seriously, and I expect it to be taken to the next Chiefs meeting to actually make sure that that is brought up at that meeting to make sure that we can address that. Mr. Speaker, we already have, the CPS themselves already have 14 specialised prosecutors in this area, and I will meet with the Solicitor General in the next couple of days to make sure we know exactly where they're based and where we're done. I'll write for my honourable friend with that. I don't want to give too much information as to where they're based, etc., because one of the things we need to do is surprise some of these people that think they can get away with whatever they feel like they can get away from. But we need to make sure we have some high-profile prosecutions and the full force of the law is brought down against them. In looking at the impact of that, Mr. Speaker, the impact on this sort of thefts is not just isolated. It's not just on a farmer. It's not just on a local authority. It's not just on the breakwaters that protect our coastline. It's actually very much on where, as my honourable friend alluded to, where that money could be spent elsewhere. And if people are involved in this sort of criminality, they are often involved in other sorts of criminality. And so one of the things we must make sure is that we make sure we have a publicity campaign going on, that when people are purchasing these stones, they ask where they come from. Now, it's often the case that if you start asking questions, the people that are standing on your doorstep trying to sell them to you vanish quite quickly. It's the sort of question that was asked of me when they asked me recently, Mr. Speaker, did I want a cash in hand for the building work done on my house? And when I told them what I did for a living, they kind of vanished rather quickly. I was quite surprised. They obviously wasn't from my area, but what I think is very important is that we, the public, have a responsibility as well. It's not just an issue for the police and the prosecutors. Of course.
I thank the Minister for giving way. One of the big issues in my constituency in the 2 years that I ran my listening campaign was this issue of rural crime, and particularly in the East Northamptonshire villages, that was a very pressing problem. And Northamptonshire Police are dealing with this in two ways. One, through introducing a parish specials scheme, which will see a volunteer special on the beat available to local residents, so that there's some reassurance and an ability to be able to report things. But also we're seeing much more cross-border policing through the Futurist Policing Scheme, which I think is a very welcome thing. Would he agree with me that what we actually need on a continual basis is more police officers out on the beat, catching criminals and deterring crime?
Yeah. This is a leading question, Mr. Speaker. So let's start with the very first point. Specials play an enormously vital role in our communities, and I had the pleasure of, long before I was the police minister, of launching not only rural specials in my constituency, but mounted rural specials, interestingly, so that the rural community felt that they were able to be out there protecting their own livelihoods as well as their homes. And the truth is, Mr. Speaker, even though we've had these very difficult austerity times over the last 5 years, in percentage terms there are more officers in uniform on the beat, on their streets, than there was before 2010, and of course crime has dropped by 20% across the nation as a whole. But we mustn't be complacent, and what we must do as crime changes, then the police forces change the way that they are detecting that sorts of crime. But I can't think of a better group of people to serve as rural specials is actually the people that live in those constituencies, that know the people that live there and actually feel part of that community. So I would always, anybody listening to this debate this evening, and I'm sure there'll be millions doing so, Mr. Speaker, the encouragement from me, of course, is please sign up to be a special. It's never too late. The age restrictions on a specials are very, very generous, and so we can have people. Of course,
my other friend who has been successful with this adjournment debate, and I congratulate him on that, did ask for exemplary sentencing also. Does the Minister agree with me that some exemplary sentences just might wake the criminals up to the fact that what they're doing is a crime, and also may deter others?
Mr. Speaker, if I could just finish the point on the specials, and I will reiterate a little bit of what I said earlier on and elaborate a little bit. The issue around, if I can, around specials is also proven in this House, where two of our colleagues have been, until very recently, specials serving their community and serving parts of London who are specials in the British Transport Police. Coming on to the point of on the intervention, I couldn't agree more, but we have to catch the people, and we have to make sure we understand the value of what the products that have been stolen and the effects on that community. And that's why the CPS, part of what I said earlier on in my commentary, is so very, very important, so that we have the specialist prosecutors. But I think the judiciary have to also understand what the will of Parliament is, which is probably one of the better reasons for standing tonight and reiterating this, is that this is such a serious crime. And very often this is organised crime, which is part of my other portfolio. Now, organised crime doesn't necessarily always mean, Mr Speaker, that there's millions and billions of pounds being stolen. Of course there is. So. But this sort of orchestrated crime is, in my opinion, organised crime in the same sorts of ways. Mr Speaker, I think it's not only an important debate to be had on the floor of the House. I was also slightly concerned, of course, right at the start of my honourable friend's speech this evening, when I think he might have indicated that a certain stone that the Labour Party owns may have gone missing. And if it has, that hasn't been reported, I understand, to police. But of course, what we're talking about is high-value stone, not actually what was a complete waste of time and effort, even though there were probably great British craftsmen doing that for them. I think, on a serious note, Mr Speaker, our heritage, whether it be here in this great house that we're lucky enough to be working in today, or whether it be a piece of milestone in my own constituency on the Watling Road on the A5, or in my own friends' constituency, the Colne Valley, or in any of my own friends' constituencies, our heritage is what we are sent here to protect. And what we must do is to make sure that we highlight in our communities that it is their job as well as the police's job to actually make sure we catch these criminals, that they are prosecuted and the force of the law comes down on them. Thank you very much, Mr Speaker.
Order. The question is that this House do now adjourn. As many as I've got to say aye. Aye. To the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Order. Order.